Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Line-Miller, your host. I'm excited to dive into what's going on at a university with programming and research today, which is a little bit different than some of the guests that we've had, but really insightful. Today, we have Stacy Pyett with us. She is the program manager at Wageningen University and Research. Welcome to our show, Stacy.
Thanks so much, Pam. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to get your insights from your perspective. Let us know, first of all, what the mission is where you are and what you're working on.
Yeah, so our organization, Wageningen University and Research, is an academic institution in the Netherlands. And our motto is to explore the potential of nature to improve the quality of life. So we're a very specific organization. We only work on life sciences, and we have a deep history in the food and ag domain. So we're very busy with climate change, with climate resilient food systems, and with transitioning our food systems to have a lower impact across the world. My particular focus is on a domain that we call protein transition. Some people talk about alternative proteins, or you can even place that in a broader context and talk about a dietary shift.
There's a lot of talk right now about protein transition and, arguments on both sides. So I'm excited to dive into this with you because I know that you're doing a lot of research in that area too. That's part of what you do. I'm going to say WUR for short instead of Wageningen University and Research throughout our show, if that's okay with you.
You're nailing it, but yeah, absolutely. That's fine.
Yeah. So you are a university, but also a nonprofit, right? So explain that dynamic.
Yeah, correct. So our organization is a bit unique for people who are usually accustomed to working with academic institutions in that it's a collaboration. So we have two under one umbrella. We have a traditional university where the goal is to educate students. That's the primary motivator for a university. And of course, we do research under that umbrella for the purpose of educating students with PhDs and master's students primarily. So that's mainly, fundamental research, more sort of exploratory science. And in order to support creating impact or translating that fundamental science into impact, we set up a nonprofit organization called Wageningen Research, in which we do more applied work to bring that science into solutions. And we do that together with partners from the food industry, philanthropic organizations, sometimes public funders. And we try to help bring the change that we discover in the science into the world.
Nice. But you're still not straying from the university's mission, which has always been with food and agriculture, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that mission is completely shared. We're very integrated. We work very closely together, one management structure, and we're all aligned to the same purpose.
Yeah, that's fabulous. It's nice to be able to see you able to bridge the gap, bringing innovation into the education system as well, and giving maybe some opportunities for some of your students and grad students to delve into some of the science of what's happening. There's a lot of innovation in the food space right now.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which I know you see a need for that. That's part of what you're doing. So can we dive a little bit into some of the programs that you're working on?
Yeah, definitely. And maybe just to put that into context, we can talk a little bit about the why am I passionate about protein transition? Why do we think that such a thing is needed? So to start with, numbers differ on how we calculate it, but pretty much everyone out there is aligned that somewhere between a quarter to a third of our global greenhouse gas emissions are associated with our food and agricultural sector. So it's pretty clear that if we want to meet the Paris Accord, if we want to meet the goals that we're setting in terms of greenhouse gas emissions reduction, we need to make a change in food and ag. And when we sort of dig further into that, the biggest chunk of those greenhouse gas emissions, and by the way, this story is quite similar for land use and water use, we see the biggest chunk is associated with livestock production. So basically the intensive animal farming that we're doing and the high level of animal source foods that are present in our diet. So that's why I come to this thinking, okay, we need to make a transition. And that transition is multifaceted. It's not necessarily everyone needs to become vegan, but we do need collectively to come together and sort of shift or rebalance our diets. We also look into the future and we see if we continue on the trend that we're on today, this picture in terms of emissions and land use is going to get much worse because there's more or less a linear correlation at the moment between gross domestic products, so the income in a country, and meat consumption in that country. So what we're seeing is as livelihoods and incomes raise in many parts of the world, we're seeing a dramatic increase in the demand for meat. And if we don't break that correlation, if we're not as high income countries taking our responsibility to reduce the animal source foods that we're consuming, we're very quickly going to sort of run out of resources to sustain this shift that is underway, the shift toward more meat consumption, more animal source food consumption. And finally, what's important for me as well is to talk about health and how our diets are serving us or not serving us, in fact. And it's not because overconsumption of animal source foods is necessarily directly related to disease states, but we also know that some of our chronic disease mortality is caused by things that we're under-consuming, plants like fruits and vegetables, whole grains and legumes. We should be eating more of those in proportion, right? So we need to make a shift also to support our well-being as we move into the future.
Interesting. I hadn't heard the statistics before, so thanks for bringing that out. The correlation between the income levels in different countries and the consumption of meat products. That's a really interesting statistic to bring out. So thanks for doing that. Just the correlation there.
Yeah, and I think we have almost a sort of ethical obligation to make more room because, I think it's fair that we start sharing our animal source foods in a little bit more even way rather than this dramatic overconsumption that we see in high income countries and in some regions still scarcity or low access to animal source foods and the good things that are in there, like the micronutrients, which can be very beneficial. So for me, there's an ethical component to that too, not just a planetary component.
Interesting. And also from the third point you brought up about the health perspective, and that if you look at a standard diet in maybe a wealthier country that might be consuming more meat, they need to consume more plant products anyway. Not necessarily saying eat less meat. However, I don't know, you consume all that food, but rebalance your plate a little bit. And add some of those healthier items in there. And then we won't have the disease states that we're having that might be caused by dietary habits that currently exist. So that's a good point.
We know what a healthy diet is, but we also know we're not following it, right? It doesn't mean there's not space for an occasional indulgence, but just, across the board, trying to balance that out would be really beneficial. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to hear a saying, people talk thin but eat fat. Like they speak like they're watching what they eat and paying attention and being nutritionally conscious. But then if you look at what they eat, or if you were to take a food diary of what they eat in a week, they're really not doing that. So we know, but to know is not to do, right?
Yes. Yeah, completely right. And that is also a complicating factor, although maybe a bit of a tangent for today, but self-reporting about our intentions for food and self-reporting what we eat is a tricky thing.
Yeah, but on track for today, honestly, with your mission and looking at trying to figure out a protein transition and how that might work, people are resistant to change. And that's a real challenge that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also sort of informs how we are working toward where people are today. So maybe this is a good moment to explain some of the different lines along which we see a transition proceeding. And these are not competing lines, but lines that will serve different segments of the population in different ways. So, one way that we can shift our diet is going directly to consumption of plants. So for example, a chickpea curry is an absolutely perfect dinner. It has a low footprint. It's very healthy. There's lots of fiber. There are good plant, we call them phytochemicals, plant molecules that come from plants. Lots of benefits to just going to a direct consumption of a plant-based dinner, a plant-forward dinner. What's difficult for some people in there is that it's not very familiar. It's not everybody knows how to convert a can of chickpeas into a delicious dinner for their family. Most people don't have a specific aversion to pulses or beans or whole grains, quinoa or chickpeas or whatever. But it is unfamiliar for a lot of people, and it requires learning a new skill. And not everyone has the time or wants to invest the time to be able to learn those new skills. That's why there's also room for more, what I would call more sort of technologically forward, more sort of advanced or slightly more complicated, to be honest, from the food system perspective of food products. So there's this intermediate category, which has been just emerging in the past, 5, even maybe up to 10 years, but I would say in the 5 years or last 5 years taken off. And those are sort of plant-based meat alternatives. So we're actually doing the work inside of the food industry to convert things like peas into something that looks like a burger, something that's very familiar, or a ground beef. The benefit there being that people know what to do with it, right? If it looks like ground beef, you know how to make a spaghetti bolognese, and your family is accustomed to consuming that as a meal. On the downside, it is a more processed product than a chickpea curry, right? Like there is more going into this. But on the plus side, it is more familiar, comfortable for a lot of people. It's not perfect yet, I have to say. Most of the consumer information that we get back, consumers are still a little bit disappointed with the taste, and that's going to be hard. Like, it's hard to get a one-to-one mimic exact. But there are still many developments that are coming, that are in the pipeline, that are going to bring those much closer to the sensory experience. And there are things that we are getting pretty good. I mean, the ground beef is pretty good. A chicken replacement, a chicken nugget type product is pretty good. We can ask ourselves if this, how is this contributing to that health shift? In terms of health, I would prefer that you eat a chickpea curry. But, if you're going to have a burger, you're not making a super healthy choice anyway. And replacing that burger with a plant-based product is actually, we think, to the best of our knowledge right now, still a good choice.
Yeah, so we have a couple of dynamics going on here, right? Because the plant-based alternatives so far, a lot of them are coming very close, but to your point, maybe that identical, so that the consumer has to do minimal changing. That's, the first, I guess, obstacle to overcome is to get them to make a choice in the plant-based alternative or similar product that's mimicking like the ground beef or the chicken nugget, for example. However, that's not really hitting your eating whole food goal, because a lot of those products, like you said, are more processed, because you're trying to get to, now the ingredients that are going into that processing are better than maybe some other processed foods that are in a bag or in a box. However, there still is a lot of work that's happening to get them to that point. The second choice is, the unfamiliar part is the obstacle to change. The familiar. How do we learn how to cook? What do we normally eat? What do we grow up? Our comfort food. What is that? And if we're not exposed, which in some of the heavier meat eating countries, we're just not exposed. We don't cook that way. We haven't used those ingredients, to your point, and there's just an ignorance, not in a negative way, just lack of exposure. So that's kind of an education piece for those that want to know how to expand their choices in the whole food area, to offer some education in that area to help us figure out, how do we cook that? What do we do with that can of chickpeas? When I walk into a farmer's market, what raw ingredients do I need to buy to come up with a good holistic dinner, for example, that's exclusive of meat? So just the education piece. And I'm speaking as a meat eater who grew up, my family did not cook that way. So I'm talking from real experience, learning from actually my grown children who do eat a little more that way. I always come home with couple new recipes from my daughter's house, for example, because they often have meatless meals, and it's really fun to see they experiment a lot more than I ever did. So I'm experimenting at this point, but it is a process, which is
that's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that, because there are a couple of things in there that I want to pick up on. First of all, the word education. I prefer the word inspiration, and I'm gonna explain that.
Yeah.
So what we observe is this principle called food choice autonomy. And basically what it means is, no one can tell me what to eat. And that is deeply held for most of us. If someone tries to tell you what you should be eating, you push back hard. I mean, and I recognize that too. I don't want to be told by anyone. It's an inherently personal decision to me. which is why I'm careful with the word education, because that can be perceived as, someone in the government is going to tell you what you take away your meat, whatever. Whereas the experience that you're having with your grown children is more inspiration. And I think that inspiration is something that we can offer and something that we can find in our food environment. It might be inspiration from a chef that you like. It might be someone from your social network. It might be a YouTube video or a TikTok video. It might be from your kids, which is often, we see this generational change happening, often the case. And then there is a piece around education, and we see that the younger generation, the younger people are more open. So we've done some work with schools, for example, in helping them understand, how is a lentil burger made? So we did a virtual reality tour of a lentil burger factory to bring it a little bit closer, to make it familiar. Also not trying to indoctrinate anyone, but to make it familiar. And that's something we can do in the generational change. And generational change, on the one hand, feels way too slow, but on the other hand, so many people I know, that's anecdotal, but so many people I know are inspired by what their kids are bringing home and interested in, that I do think that generational change can have a bigger impact, also a faster impact than just sort of waiting for them to age into the system.
Right, because we might not make those choices on our own. I mean, why would we change? We don't really have any inspiration, using your word, to change. I'm good as I am. And so you have to get exposed somehow. And I think that a trusted source, like a family member or a friend who has some experience in that area, that all helps to minimize that consumer resistance to change, which is, a lot of what we're working toward eliminating when you're talking about transition of any kind, certainly, and in the protein transition activities.
Yeah, and I think we continuously underestimate how, and I'm going to say this in a little bit maybe funny way, but how lazy we are collectively. Like, we are truly creatures of habit. And so one of the most powerful interventions that we discovered to shift people's diets is just changing the default option. So we actually did this together with a restaurant. Their default option was a chicken burrito. And if you wanted to, you could ask for a bean burrito as an alternative. And you get about 80% of people choosing the chicken burrito and 20% the bean. And then what we did was flip that the bean burrito was the standard. But if you wanted, you could ask for the chicken burrito flipped. Really, I mean, like, literally flipped it on its head. 80% of people just go for the standard. It's not 80% of people definitely want meat. 80% of people just accept whatever you tell them is the default, which is really powerful, and also I think, shows that it's not necessarily purely on the individual to make the change. It's also collective in how do we, what do we make the default? What's the thing that's easy to grab? What's the thing that's there right in front of you at eye level in the supermarket? And that is more of an environmental change than an individual change, which in some ways is also hopeful for me, because it means there is something we can do without necessarily asking every individual to take personal responsibility for this.
Yeah, and finding those collective areas where people eat, and you can have a default, like maybe the college campuses and the food systems that they offer, and having some additional default items that might be more in the plant-based category, the whole foods category. And I've seen that actually in the interviews that we've done, is universities are in that direction. They do offer a wider variety of whole food options instead of everything in a casserole or processed that way with the ingredients already there. But restaurants, certainly, like you brought up, to have some good quality food available that fall in the same category of an alternative protein, or using plant-based whole foods for the main option instead of defaulting to the meat. Certainly in the United States where I live, it usually defaults to the meat at this point. If you go to a restaurant, the non-meat main dishes are not the main thing that's on the menu. They're in a separate category. So, it's all a transition, but I know that Also, I hear consumers don't want to be regulated like you have to. Like you said, we don't want to be told what we have to eat. We would like it to be a choice. And certainly, like you were saying, interesting that flipping that default choice then has we are lazy, aren't we? We just do we just go with what's offered. And then, if we put some thought into it, we might take the alternative choice and get the chicken instead of the bean burrito. But wow, that's an interesting statistic as well. But it speaks to how into a routine we get.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think so. I want to come back to sort of the lines that we're working on, because acknowledging that for some people, this change, even a change to a plant-based meat alternative, is a little bit too big. There are other options that we have that come completely toward where people are right now, or much farther toward where people are right now. And I think I think it's nice to just hit on those a bit.
Yeah.
So one of the options that I'm very interested in that we've been working on is how can we incorporate something plant-based into meat, right? Because one option is we're going to, I don't know, on Monday and Tuesday, not eat meat and eat the vegetarian option. Another option is that maybe 20% of our meat is substituted out for a textured pea, protein. And by the way, I've seen those products. I've gotten consumer feedback on them. They can be very delicious. You can even completely just not notice. If your burger is 20% pea based, actually, it can be completely invisible to you. So for consumers, that could be a change that is just, asks nothing, right? I mean, it asks nothing whatsoever. And one of our supermarkets in the Netherlands has recently launched a product that has, I think it's about 30% texturized pea in the ground beef. And they're also selling it at 30% below the price. And we know from our consumer research that for especially lower socioeconomic status consumers, price is a big driver in choosing their meat products and which meat to buy. So this is one that asks sort of no compromise in terms of sensory quality, in terms of experience of deliciousness, little or no change in production, and can also actually save money. So that's a technology, that's a direction that I think is a big win also for the broader population who's not inherently motivated to go and specifically buy something plant-based. So that one I think is really important. And then I know on your podcast before you've dug into more what we call the cultivated meat, lab-grown meat, has a lot of different names, a lot of ways of being labeled. I think that is also a really interesting future technology, but it's still, for now, it's still a bit of a future technology, right? So it's still some years out until we can rely on those products. But when we have those products, we'll be able to offer something that is exactly, like literally the exact experience of a meat product. For now, those products are still also hybrid, so they're mixtures of plant-based and cultured meat, which is fine. But the goal there is to make something that is no compromise, just completely familiar. And I think that's where our technology developments need to focus, is coming ever closer to help that part of the consumer population who is not willing to make a compromise or not inherently motivated to make a change.
Yeah, good point. Thanks for bringing all those out, because Stacy, I think it's helpful for people to know what the whole spectrum is, because I think it is going to be a spectrum of choices that we're going to have moving into the future. Nothing is actually going to be eliminated. We might shift the balance of things, but we're offering more and more choices, and then consumers can work their way through what they're comfortable with, what they like, how they want to consume their protein. Thanks for bringing all those options out. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience about what you're working on at WR before we go?
Yeah, I thought maybe just to close this, to talk about some things that I think are maybe underattended to, or like just big important questions that we haven't yet settled in my domain, and where, I mean, I'm a researcher, right? So I'm always eager to talk about where we need more research. So I think I'll just highlight a couple. So I think the first and most important thing is we need to understand a little bit, how do we help people really specifically reduce meat consumption? So I'm just going to talk a little bit about why that's a concern for me. Number one, we've seen increasing sales of plant-based meat alternatives. We've seen in the Netherlands, where I live and where we measure a lot of consumer data, 52% of our population is telling us that they're actively trying to reduce their meat consumption, which is great, amazing majority. On the other hand, we don't see decreasing meat consumption. Like when we track the figures, we don't necessarily see it back. And I think we need to really dig into the underlying sociological factors of what's going on there. There are some things we know from the energy transition, for example, that we overcompensate. So we'll go around our house and we'll put in energy saving light bulbs everywhere, and then we'll decide to leave the lights on longer because we can, right? Because we've already put in, or in our domain, in my domain, we maybe skip meat on Mondays. We participate in meatless Mondays, but we might feel justified in having 2 helpings of ribs on Friday. We might compensate or we might overcompensate.
Yeah.
So there's a possibility that we're doing strange things that are sort of not resulting in actual meat consumption going down. And we need to keep our eye on the prize that that's the goal. And we need to make sure each thing that we're doing, that it's genuinely getting us where we're going and not just, adding something or creating compensation behavior. So I think we need much more sociological research. And then the other thing that I think we are missing, and I'm encouraged that some of that is starting to emerge. I think we need much more research around the health impacts of different types of diets. So we know what is a healthy diet, which is that whole food diet. We know that's healthy. That's the sort of global nutrition consensus, right? What we don't know is, what does a modern plant-based diet look like from our body's perspective? And we believe, or we have reason to believe, that a modern plant-based burger, it's not worse than a meat burger, right? I mean, we don't think so. From the scant evidence that we have, we know that we can provide the right nutrition inside of that. On the other hand, a more holistic approach in terms of what's that doing with our biomarkers, what's that doing with our, our heart health, our gut health, et cetera. That research is just not out there yet because this is a relatively new category. And, even more so for the things that are still emerging, like the cultured meat, et cetera. So we need much more attention for that, much more sort of funding and much more collaborative work to really understand the impact of health, of diet on our overall well-being. And I think that having that evidence will also help motivate the shift for people who are maybe concerned or have question marks about current modern plant-based foods.
Very nice. Thank you. And I agree with you. The sociological research, have been very active in the health and wellness space. And I know a lot of people that start a new workout regimen, for example, and they start either running or going to the gym, or they often justify, well, I worked out this morning, so I can have this ice cream after. There's that dynamic, which goes right in line with what you're talking about.
Yep.
If I don't have meat on Monday, then on Friday, I could have an extra helping. And we do justify like that with a lot of things that we do. Interesting perspective I'm going to be bringing to my habits moving forward. So thanks so much, Stacy. Appreciate you being with Future Foodcast today and sharing your insights and the research that you're working on.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
Yeah, if you've enjoyed having Stacy, please let us know, send a comment, like, and subscribe to our show so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, I'm Pam Line-Miller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.